Hi, and welcome to episode 43 of Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the new digital economy and the future of money. Visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com for our daily guest blog, all our past episodes, and of course, tipping options. My name is Adam B. Levine, and today's show is speculative but foundational. Bitcoin is a technology so new that many basic core elements that are required for common use simply don't exist. And we start the show talking about washing machines, parking meters, and Andy Schroeder's liquid dispensing project. Then I catch up with Michael Hill and Danny Brewster on their exciting Bitcoin bank and payment card project in Cyprus, and how they want to turn Cyprus into a bright beacon of Bitcoin opportunity. Turning to more serious topics, and following a recent scandal at TechCrunch Disrupt, I'm joined by Andreas and Stephanie to discuss discrimination in male-dominated industries. Andreas makes a pledge not to attend conferences lacking policies to deal with such things, and we finish up with a talk about hiring practices. Thanks to those of you who have purchased video conference passes, we're very excited to provide this service and have another way to raise the funds that power the show. If you haven't already pre-ordered your pass in Bitcoins, visit bitcoinvideopass.com and see how easy buying in Bitcoin can be. Early bird prices end soon. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the show. We spent a lot of time talking about how Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are at a really nascent stage, really early in the life cycle. And so a lot of the things that you would expect to exist, in fact, don't, because nobody's bothered to make them yet. So in the last couple of weeks, I've gotten to know a few different guys and their projects, and I wanted to take the opportunity to sort of start talking about this. The topic broadly I'm calling push button Bitcoin. It's these devices that provide an interface between real world stuff and Bitcoin and cryptocurrency broadly speaking. So there are a couple of projects. The first one is Morgan Rockwell out of, I think he's in Vancouver. He's working on a Bitcoin washing machine, but it's not just about a washing machine. Essentially what he's designed, again, is this interface that essentially you send Bitcoin to, it has a little screen and has an address that it gives you and it tells you how much to send. And then once that amount has been received that's appropriate for whatever it's trying to do, then it presses a button, and it can press a button for a set length of time if there's something that only operates while it's being, pressed, or it can basically activate things. So he envisions using it in laundromats where there are no dollars, there is no change that needs to have armored cars come and pick it up. Instead, you just go to the laundromat, you send, your fraction of a Bitcoin to it, and there you go. It turns on and you've got your solution there.
Quick explanation, because as a non-American, I have to tell you, a laundromat is a very American thing.
Oh.
A laundromat is a commercial establishment full of washing machines and dryers where you can go if you don't have one in your home, and you can deposit money to wash and dry your clothes. Doesn't exist everywhere, just letting you know.
I actually had no idea. I have never used a laundromat, but I did not know they were a U.S. phenomenon.
I haven't either, but I have used in apartment complexes. Sometimes they'll have a pay machine that's like just for the building.
Yes, and in other places, especially in Europe at least, it was only in student dorms that you would find that kind of thing. But yeah, still, even in student dorms, I think that's a great application for vending machines and student services and laundry.
Getting those rolls of quarters was the worst.
Exactly.
Well, and it's also bad for the business owner, too, because then they have to take all those rolls of quarters that people have spent with them and somehow get them to a bank, which means that you can be robbed. I mean, again, there are like all of these things that add to the cost of doing business that if you don't have tangible money that can actually be stolen from your establishment, it sort of fixes that problem. And to a lesser extent, this is also true of one of the other areas that Morgan's looking at with this project, parking meters, where, you park. And then again, I think that this is not just US. So correct me if I'm wrong here. You put in a couple of coins into the parking meter, and then you have a set amount of time. And again, the problem is that these machines can break, and they have mechanisms, where things can get stuck, and they can be stolen, because they can just be cut off and you can take the whole thing with you. But with Bitcoin, again, there's nothing to take. So there are advantages there.
And all of these are examples of payment systems that primarily operate with coins, so small denomination payments. If they do operate with notes, that's relatively rare, and most of these don't have credit card machines. And the primary reason is, of course, the cost of the transactional fee that goes with each of these. So it's a perfect niche for Bitcoin, isn't it?
Once you get to a place of adoption, it is. But again, you have like this chicken egg problem where it almost doesn't make sense to develop it until you've got the market, but you can't have the market until you've developed the application. So, I think that projects like Morgan is undertaking are really important because, yes, they're speculative, but they're foundational. These are technologies. Again, what's he doing? He's essentially created something that's an interface to push a button, but it's still the implications, if you play it out, are enormous.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to make people's lives easier. And I think people really appreciate when you make their lives easier. I was just picturing, like, for instance, what if there was a bar or like a coffee shop or something that had up at the bar a Bitcoin vending machine and next to it a Bitcoin soda machine. So like you could maybe put cash in, get some Bitcoins on your phone, and then for the next month or so, you'd be able to like a QR code next to a soda machine and get a soda with your Bitcoins that you just bought. I mean, that would be really cool. And it would provide a way to get around the cash. The soda machine could be much smaller if it operated with something like Bitcoin. So the possibilities are just endless. And especially if it's paired with a quick and easy way for people to get Bitcoins, it even increases it more, especially during the adoption phase where people have trouble getting Bitcoin sometimes.
Adam, do you know if the platform used for this project was something like an Arduino or Raspberry Pi or something like that? I'd be interested in the possibilities of others using embedded microelectronics to do Bitcoin stuff.
Yeah, I don't know the specific hardware that he's working on, but I do know that it is based off of Arduino and that it is an open source platform. And then that's something I'm not sure if his project is fully open source. I'm not clear on that, but he has been developing his initial prototypes on that platform. And it's great because the barrier to entry there to just create something and make sure that it's going to work is so small that, again, you can leverage this. The cost to do it is quite low, even though it's very speculative.
I think that intersection of microelectronics, kind of hacker spaces and micropayments will be very interesting.
Absolutely. And we've already seen, Morgan's project is certainly an important one, and he's been working on it for a bit longer, I guess, than this other one. But I spoke with Andy Schroeder the other day, who's working on a Bitcoin fluid dispenser, and he has a 20-minute video up that we're going to link in the show notes when I run that interview that essentially shows this entirely portable diesel dispensing system that is based off of this design that he has. You go to a gas station and you want to buy gas. You have two options, generally speaking. You can either put in a credit card or a debit card, and then it'll essentially take money off and increase your bill. And then at the end of it, it charges you. Or you can go into and talk to the cash register attendant, give them, say, $40 or $20, if whatever you want to put onto it, and go back out and then fill up your car. And then once you're done, if you have change, then you go back in and you get the change. So with this Bitcoin fluid dispenser, say I have an idea of how much I want, and I think it's going to cost me $40 worth of Bitcoin. Well, if I wind up spending $30 worth of Bitcoin in order to get the amount of gas that I wanted to get, then automatically, once my transaction is completed, the remainder is sent back to the same address that it came from. So it's very, very similar to having a cash transaction with the attendant inside, except you have all of the convenience of just doing it at the pump like you would with a credit card. That's something that initially is being applied to fuel, and I think that it has a lot of interesting implications in the world of fuel and fuel dispensing, but it could also be applied to any sort of liquid. You could apply, Stephanie, you mentioned a soda. I was thinking about like a draft beer machine or something like that. Get those big jugs of water, things like that. There's this entire list of things that you can do using this same type of interface.
To our previous conversation, I hope he has the ability to set it to measure in milliliters and liters for internationalization purposes, because quite honestly, no one else in the world understands what on earth you're talking about with these flosses and auses and lubs and gallons. So since you can't get your metric together, I hope he's got an interface in there for the rest of the world who did get their metric together.
I think that's a relatively easy part of the problem to solve.
I really like this idea about the Bitcoin fluid dispenser because it really automates that kind of work. Like, no longer would bartenders have to sit there and fill up a glass of Coke by pressing a button and, potentially pressing the wrong button or whatever and spending their time to do that. It could all just run off of Bitcoin. When you pay a certain amount, you get a certain amount of liquid, and that's making life easier. Hey.
So I think that probably speaks to a broader opportunity here for various types of microelectronic devices that bring Bitcoin into the real world and allow you to do various forms of counting, measuring, or dispensing of fluids, of solids, of discrete units of electricity, or whatever else it might be.
Potentially this could even be a way to make these things cheaper, because when a human being doesn't have to spend their time, i.e. on the clock, dispensing liquids or whatever you're dispensing, then maybe that savings could be passed on to the consumer.
It's a double-edged sword in a world where we increasingly have less service-oriented jobs. And I mean, this is something where as we move more and more into an automated future, and certainly that's what Bitcoin as sort of a programmable form of money, as it's recently been called, sort of leads us to, a lot of these service jobs don't really make sense anymore. So, I mean, how do you think that works? I mean, play out the logic for a second.
It's great. I mean, it's kind of the age-old problem where, when cars were invented, the people who made horseshoes were upset. There are always going to be jobs for people, and liberating people from jobs that might not be that exciting, like dispensing beer or whatever, that could be a great thing. And it could also make the products cheaper for the consumers. So technology is going to move forward. A lot of jobs are going to be replaced by robotics or automated systems. And that's great, because then we'll be able to pay less for the things that we buy, and people won't have to do those jobs that, frankly, a robot could do. They'll be freed up to do other things.
I think that that's a scary future for people moving forward, though. I mean, I understand what you're saying, Stephanie, and this obviously gets off into the weeds from the Bitcoin topics. But I mean, that's like a really common concern that people have, is that, yes, you're right in theory, but how long does it take to develop those jobs? I mean, with the way that the world is looking right now, where we have sort of this global financial issue that doesn't really seem like it's going away, and jobs in many places don't seem like they're really coming back.
Don't worry, it's not the Bitcoin pumps that are going to really mess things up. It's actually the ability of Bitcoin to bring in the services of the other 6.5 billion and replace us, the service industries, that are dealing in knowledge work. That's going to be a much bigger effect than replacing physical service businesses with Bitcoin, for sure.
I think it's inevitable that this is going to happen. I mean, manufacturing has been going this way for years, since it began becoming increasingly automated. And yeah, there's pain when people get displaced from manufacturing or potentially service jobs. But the great thing about human beings is they don't just have one skill. They can do all kinds of different things. When one door closes, another one opens. We can find all kinds of different opportunities. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. We just have to find a way to roll with it.
Hello, I'm Jeffrey Tucker, Bitcoin enthusiast and host of the upcoming cryptocurrency conference in Atlanta, Georgia, October 5th. We've got a marvelously libertarian-infused day of discussion about what is indisputably the future of money, and you are invited. For those of you who can't attend, we've partnered with Let's Talk Bitcoin to offer video conference passes available for government currency and, of course, Bitcoin. For more information, bitcoinvideopass.com.
More than 300,000 users and counting trust blockchain.info. It's a Bitcoin wallet service and a wealth of Bitcoin information, and is completely free to use. With a blockchain.info wallet, you'll get the convenience of a web wallet and the security of a desktop client. Blockchain.info is also a block explorer. You can use it to see Bitcoin transactions in real time, check the balance of any Bitcoin address, and view many handy Bitcoin charts, all for free. See what they have to offer today at blockchain.info.
In the journey of Bitcoin, Cyprus has taken something of a leading role. Even though it's a relatively small country by most country standards, it was the first to demonstrate that the banking sector has rules that are subject to change at just about any time if the situation is bad enough. Earlier in the year, we spoke with Michael Hill, who was getting ready to take the Bitcoin message to Cyprus and to start educating people about it there. We're a couple of months later, and so I'm really happy to be rejoined by Michael Hill and his partner Danny Brewster so they can update us on what's happening in the region. Michael, it's great to have you back on the show.
Hi, Adam. Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. So we're also joined by Danny Brewster. Danny Brewster is your business partner, right, for your ventures in Cyprus?
He's basically the mastermind behind this project. That's how I like to call it. I'm more of helping him out in marketing and advertising department here in Cyprus.
It's been a few months. Can you catch us up? What's happened during that time? What have you been able to accomplish? It seems like you've definitely made some progress.
A lot has happened. Since then, what has followed are many layoffs. Economic downturn has dampened the mood. The economy of Cyprus seems to be at a standstill right now, in a sense that people don't trust banks. Businessmen have to struggle with capital controls. In general, it seems like Cyprus is headed for a very serious recession this year. Generally speaking, the central banking system has failed people here in Cyprus, and that's how they see it. Like you said, we last spoke back in April. Back then, the mood was much different. As we know, Bitcoin spiked in price, and during the Eurogroup decision in March 15th, most people have forgotten what's been happening here in Cyprus. Even though Cyprus is out of the headlines as of late, people here are dealing with a new reality of a collapsed banking system. That's where we come in.
When we spoke last, you were getting ready to head to Cyprus and you were in Greece at the time. What was the initial experience like trying to introduce these concepts to people? Because again, like you said, the banking system and the central banking system has failed. And yet I don't think that there's any talk about anything like leaving the euro and taking back control of the currency locally, is there?
Well, there were certain politicians that tried to popularize the idea of getting out of the euro and maybe reissuing the pound. But quickly, those discussions just ceased. They just stopped. Nobody considers it a viable option for Cyprus. And certainly there is no politician gunning for that option right now. So the mood in Cyprus right now that we really have no choice. We have to stay in the euro. We have to follow the decisions from the Eurogroup and the Troika. To a lot of people, when we come out and say, look, there's another alternative. You can start using Bitcoin. People need to be educated for sure about Bitcoin. I mean, we need more Greek language content, more meetings on the ground here in Cyprus, more person-to-person talks with merchants, business people, consumers. That's how we're getting things done. It's a relatively slow process, certainly a lot slower than maybe a lot of people would like, but we're making sure in steady steps to ensure that this business will be a success in this market.
When we first spoke, you had the idea about focusing on education and trying to bring awareness, but the project that you guys have grown into involves a couple of different businesses. The first one is, I think the one that everything is built off of is called Neo. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Danny?
Yeah, sure. Neo is going to provide brick and mortar branches around the island so people can obtain Bitcoin in the most easy way, in the way that they are used to dealing with a financial institution. And we're going to make it really accessible. So we'll give them a wallet that we look after the security for. And also we remove all the complexities from Bitcoin in its raw format that myself, Michael, and pretty much all of your listeners are used to dealing with. So it's common for them. But the average man or woman in the street are somewhat put off by the complexities of Bitcoin. As soon as you start talking to them, you can see them switch off within 30 seconds of you mentioning the word cryptography. We're looking to remove all of that, take care of it all, and let them use Bitcoin in a way that suits their needs best.
So what does that look like? I guess I have two questions here. First off, when we're talking about brick and mortar locations, are these locations where you're partnering with an existing bank to provide Bitcoin services, or is this a business entirely devoted to this Neo concept of Bitcoin banking?
Yes, we're opening our own Neo branches around the island.
We're starting from scratch, basically. Everything's from scratch, freshly baked like Mama used to do.
We need to ensure that we can build our own trust and develop that trust over a period of time with our customers and the Cypriot people. To go and partner with an existing bank and offer these, it would go against the grain of everything because the traditional banks don't have that trust anymore. There's a piece been released in the newspaper here today that shows, following a recent survey, how many people actually trust the banks here. And it is 4 in 5 do not trust any of the traditional banks.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are lots of people around the world who would like to do what it is that you're doing there, where you're offering, very accessible banking services, or you're hoping to offer very accessible banking services. But there are a variety of reasons, many of them regulatory, that sort of seem like they prevent that. Is the situation different in Cyprus? Or like you said, since the banking system has collapsed, there are limits to the control?
No, there is no limits to their control. First of all, to make us regulated, they need to recognize Bitcoin as money. That is something that we're lobbying through our lawyers and our accounting partners, and also some other existing businesses. We're getting involved with this process now to create a clear and concise legal framework for Bitcoin businesses to operate within. So Cyprus can then attract outside investment, which is something that Cyprus really wants for itself. Through having that clear and concise legal framework, it will become a hotbed and literally create a whole new Bitcoin industry in Cyprus, because there's so many people looking to find a friendly jurisdiction where they know where they stand. That's what we're lobbying for here. And because Cyprus is so small, we can get direct to the decision makers, and we already have. So we've always got the clear channels of communication with these people to ensure this can happen.
Cyprus has a long history of, it's a service-oriented economy. So we do have the workforce and the infrastructure even to make something like this work. Also, it has a long tradition of commerce. Cyprus is not so much a producer or farming economy or a primary sector economy. It's very much geared toward the tertiary sector, services, finance, and business. This, along with the economic situation, with the collapse of the banks and the economic downturn, it really makes Cyprus an ideal place to open this business.
Going on from that, somebody said to me that hadn't heard of Bitcoins prior to meeting me about 3 months ago. He's now one of the biggest Bitcoin followers out there. He fills my email inbox every day with every single Bitcoin news story with his own comments. He said to me, for revolution to occur, you need a big bang event, and the bail-ins was that big bang event, which has provided the platform for this to succeed here in Cyprus, to hand the power back to the people that was left powerless by those that have taken their trust and abused it.
So you said that you're going to hide a lot of the complexity from users. Can you give us a little bit of detail about what parts specifically you've identified?
The first one is your Bitcoin address, 34-character key. To look at it, compared to an 8-digit account number that you would get with a traditional bank, absolutely everybody that I've spoken to prefers the 8-digit account number. So we're going to be changing behaviors, but not changing them too fast, because if you try and enforce too much change too quickly, people just reject it. We're going to let them interact with us how they do their normal traditional bank, so we can make that change slowly over a period of time.
Let me just take a guess here. What you're going to do is you're going to give them an account number that'll be with Neo, and then that'll be connected to one or multiple Bitcoin addresses.
Yes, in the back end, we're going to be using multiple signature addresses. So if the account holder was to suddenly pass away or anything, the heirs to that money can obtain the balance from that wallet. And also, should we fail as a business through another third legal party, they can provide the 2 private keys to gain access to that wallet. So even if we're not here as a business anymore, people can still get their money out.
Both parties turn their keys at the same time, and there are 3 keys out there that work.
Yes.
That sounds like an interesting way to remove a lot of the complexity without removing any of the limitations. And, the multi-sig key thing is a really interesting way to go about that. It's like people are partnering with you to secure their funds, because on their own, they lack the ability to do that. And on your own, you don't have the ability to do that and still make it available to them in the way that they need it to be available. So I think that's an interesting solution for that.
Yes. Plus, it also removes the possibility of us failing and the customer's money disappearing at the same time. And also it protects their sons, daughters, grandchildren's inheritance, so they can always access those coins. The contract that we have with third party, we will make it publicly known who that third party is once the final decision has been made. So that contract between ourselves will ensure that we cannot just take a customer's money. All they can do is, at the request of the customer or in the presence of a death certificate, provide access to that wallet.
This interlocks with your other system, which is called B. And B seems to me to be kind of like a transaction network. Is that right?
Yes, it's our version of Visa or MasterCard. The name was taken because the president at the time of the bail-ins was talking about a plan B that he never really had. So we've called the payment network B, as in plan B. And also we can tie the Bitcoin logo into the B logo as well.
And also because everyone loves bees, I guess.
So with B, it will allow our customer to access their funds through a network of merchants. We can provide almost instant settlements and much, much lower transaction fees in comparison to the monopoly holder here in Cyprus that provides payment gateways. Because of that monopoly holder, e-commerce hasn't taken off in Cyprus as it has in pretty much every other country in the world.
I would also add that the payment network also answers the very frequent question of, okay, what can I do with Bitcoins? In the Bitcoin meetings, people are saying, okay, say that I buy a Bitcoin. I mean, who's going to accept it? How do I use it? This would be an obvious answer. We're planning on initially launching with a network of 1,000 merchants in Cyprus that will accept the B payment network. once we have that in place, it'll be a lot easier to convince people to deposit their money with Neo and to use the payment network card.
Have you been talking to merchants about that yet?
Yes. I really wish that I could the big blockbuster news, but we're just waiting to sign the contracts on the second one. But I can guarantee it will make a few headlines within Bitcoin.
Yes. And also, I can say that a lot of people here in Nicosia, a lot of merchants like small shop owners or just convenience store owners, things like that, they're very interested in this, especially with the low transaction fees and the instant pay settlements. I mean, those two are just so obvious advantages to them. So they're practically sold right now, I would say.
So from the user's perspective, what does a B transaction look like? Is it like a debit card transaction?
To use the B network, we're going to be using EMV chip and pin systems, but we're also adding a second layer of authentication because Bitcoin being irreversible and instantaneous, we need to ensure that a card and pin cannot just become compromised as it is with a traditional bank. So what we've added in is fingerprint technology, so it doesn't slow down transaction time. There is other ways to do it, but people in Cyprus, there isn't a great market penetration of smartphone users as there are in other parts of the world. So the easiest way for us to do it is through fingerprint technology and the chip and pin system. So to compromise the card, they need to cut the person's finger off and get their PIN number and the card to be able to use it in the store. Online, we're going to be introducing for both our online account management services and for online card purchases, we're going to use a chip and pin smart card reader, which is very common in the UK, and it has reduced the losses to online banking fraud drastically since the introduction of these. It provides, once the customers put the card into the reader, entered the PIN number, provided the response code on the screen, which will then provide the customer with a number that they must respond into the system with to add another layer of authentication.
So this is two-factor authentication where you have a little point-of-sale card reader device plugged into your computer.
It's not much bigger than a credit card itself. Almost all the banks in the United Kingdom use them, and they have had really high success rates of reducing compromised accounts online.
It's much safer.
Yeah.
So what's the catch? Not specifically with the card reader, but with your project in general. What are the risks and dangers you're still trying to overcome?
The biggest one is the price volatility with Bitcoin. That was a barrier of entry to our customers. So we are going to be offering pegged accounts. And most of the concerns that have been brought up from within the community is that a lack of platforms to trade options and futures. So we've gone out and spoken with the operators of the existing platforms that have vast amounts of liquidity on their platforms, and the response has been great. Some of them are going to be included in our lobbying process. One this morning was already planning all types of different funds that they could offer in Bitcoin before I'd even left the room. So the response there has been great. We know that we need to get these platforms to be able to reduce the risk on ourselves, and that'll be an added benefit for Bitcoin because throughout the forums and threads on Reddit and places like that, people constantly complain that they have a lack of options in trading platforms because it's very much restricted to the common 3-4 exchanges. So we've gone out there to speak with the operators of these platforms, which can increase the amount of liquidity and increase the volume in Bitcoin itself with their own existing customer base. But it also gives people from within Bitcoin already a chance to acquire the services that they've been looking for quite a while.
These aren't conventional Bitcoin exchanges. They're more like legacy platforms that deal with traditional Forex?
Yes, traditional financial market sector, yes.
And you're partnering with them to integrate Bitcoin into their offerings?
We're not essentially partnering with them. We're selling Bitcoin to them to get them to introduce it into their offerings. We will have trading relationships with some of the platforms because we'll need to use them.
I see. So rather than trying to bootstrap locally using only the liquidity available in Cyprus, you've gone to the international market and are using their liquidity to make sure all your local needs are met while growing the Cyprus market.
Yes.
Okay, so again, what's the catch?
From the outset, I set out when I was developing this idea of even before the banking fiasco that happened in March and April here, what are the problems for Bitcoin to catch on a mass scale? Complexity, can I spend my money? The volatility. So through addressing each one of those problems, it brought up new problems, which have been well documented in the thread. And I've been unable, that I couldn't really talk about it too much. But now things have progressed even further. I brought meetings forward to ensure that I could provide more information than was previously envisioned. So we've gone out and we've made the connections with the regulators, the lawyers, the accountancy firms, and the people that are working in finance here already. So we've got all the contacts, and most of them are great on the idea. A lot of these people have lost out in the banks already, so they want to see an alternative. The biggest part that we keep getting told by these people is you've got to market it right, which is why we've partnered with Telia and Pavla, and some of the activities that we've got that Michael will be able to tell you about even in more detail. Our first for Bitcoin again, we're advertising on the TV with airlines as well, airports.
We're planning a full media campaign for when we launch, full PR campaign as well, organizing road shows and talking to merchants and setting up the network and then advertising to the general public about NEO. We've been working with Telia and Pavla on this, and they're ready to go. We're just waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger on that. Yeah, like you said, you're looking for the catch here. The fact that you're finding it hard to find a catch, it just shows how much sense this business model makes in the conditions that we're living in right now here in Cyprus. It just seems to be like the perfect storm of events have come together, to create this business. And we're really confident that it'll work.
There is always risk involved. I don't want people to think that we're ignoring risks. If Bitcoin was to catastrophically implode, there is risk involved, but we've taken steps to ensure that we have a contingency plan for each and every possible case scenario. We are operating on the full reserve basis, and there's a spreadsheet going to be released which demonstrates just exactly how we can trade, and people themselves, including yourself, Adam, can put their figures in. The spreadsheet is preloaded with all the figures from the height of the April crash down to the lowest point when it crashed 75% across 2 days. We've already included those figures. So if anybody wants to add their own figures, their own amount of deposits, spread them out differently between time-based accounts and instant access accounts, they'll be able to do that and see how exactly our business model operates to ensure that the customer has always got the correct amount of Bitcoins in their wallet.
So the full reserve basis is an interesting thing. We've seen people talk about or attempt Bitcoin banks before, but you seem fairly far along in the process. What's the next step? What's required to make this actually happen?
The IPVO will start on Friday at 1 p.m. EST.
Okay, what's an IPVO?
It's initial public virtual offering. Many people within Bitcoin refer to them as an IPO, which is very much a Wall Street term. But what we're offering is essentially crowdfunding with a profit share. So we wanted to differentiate ourselves from the traditional stock markets. It's not traded on Wall Street, it's traded on Bitfunder, and it's accessible through BTC, TC and Havelock as well. We're getting the collective from within the Bitcoin community to raise the initial capital required to take all of these steps. Things have been pretty positive so far, but I don't count my chicken until it's done.
So if you're not using the fractional reserve model, how are you planning to generate this profit?
What we're going to be doing is removing the negative risk of the volatility. So when the price drops, we add more Bitcoins to our customers' wallets from our own reserves. When the price increases, the exchange rate increases of Bitcoin, that's where we make our profits from those accounts. We do have some time-based deposits accounts between 6 and 60 months where people can essentially put their money into their wallet for 6 months, 12 months, 24. They'll receive a percentage of every month's growth, and then we as NEO will benefit from the rest, but we also provide the protection against the falls in the price. So they're offered the potential to earn more as Bitcoin grows itself. That also ensures the coins aren't going to be withdrawn for 6 or 12 or 24 months. We're going to be offering insurance products through a carrier so we can brand the products, and that's very much still in the works. We're not just operating on the basis that the Bitcoin price is going to go up. We are looking to bring in other additional streams of income, such as international money remittance Transaction fees on B and the POS rental charge, we've tried to be as fair as we possibly can for the merchants. The first 1,000 merchants, we're removing all barriers to the adoption. So they're getting free transactions and a free POS terminal. So they have the added incentive to talking to their customers, to getting them to pay with B, because they don't have to pay 3, 4, 5, up to 10%, and they get the money almost instantly. So
that sounds like a really interesting approach. You're letting people locally use Bitcoin without any of the price fluctuations, and you're funding by essentially letting investors speculate on your local customers' behalf. So your investors are taking on the price volatility risk for better or for worse, and the people who just want a functional transaction network can use it that way.
When the balance in their wallet decreases because each one of those Bitcoins is worth more, the balance goes into our reserves.
That would be for accounts pegged in euros. If someone has deposits in Bitcoin, obviously the price fluctuation won't affect the amount of Bitcoin in there.
Right, but similarly, they're not protected from the price decreasing, and the volume in their account would decrease along with it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We expect the majority of our initial customers to take on the pegged accounts.
It makes sense. It makes it stable so you can conduct commerce.
Yes. We're giving the people the opportunity to use the part of the Bitcoin protocol which benefits them the most. And right now here, the public feel is the majority of them just want to protect their money. And following research that we'd done previously, the majority would rather put some money away and potentially get a return, but know that that money just cannot be taken by the bank or by the government to pay for somebody else's mistakes, than get a guaranteed 2% over a 12-month period and not know if they're getting that money back at the end of it.
So if somebody wants to learn more or get involved in your project, what are the best ways to do that?
The prospectus is available at lmb-holdings.com. You can find us in the securities thread of bitcointalk.org. More than approachable myself. My username pretty much everywhere is Crypto Cyprus. So people can get in touch with me. Those that have asked me questions already have always had a response, and I'll continue that as much as my time allows. I am doing 20-hour days pretty much every day, but I am very much wanting to be open and transparent with everybody and answer all questions, concerns with regards to the business. So,
as far as the general public is concerned, there have been criticisms about the legality or the regulations surrounding Bitcoin, what any future regulation would be imposed on Bitcoin. Of course, we can't answer that. We don't know. But Danny has said from the beginning that we are going to be fully compliant with any ECB rules and regulations that may be introduced in the future.
But we're also taking the proactive approach to saying to them,
right,
we would much rather take the front foot and have a say in any framework that is created or provided, or guidelines that are provided for Bitcoin businesses. It's better to have somebody from the inside that knows what Bitcoin is and what it is capable of, to have a say directly with the regulators. So that is something that we're addressing from the start as well. That was one of the concerns from the public when we spoke to them. So that's why we're making these lobbying efforts as well.
Well, guys, I'm really excited about your project. Looks like you've got a lot of traction with the idea, and it's a good one. Danny and Michael, thanks for joining me on Let's Talk Bitcoin. We'll catch up with you again soon and look forward to your continued progress.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Hope to see you in Cyprus sometime.
Yeah, sometime soon.
Brilliant.
Hi, Stephanie here. Would you like to turn your book into an enthralling audiobook? Need a persuasive commercial to promote your company? How about a narrator for your explainer video? Here's where I can help. I'm a freelance voiceover artist, and since 2009, I've lent my voice to dozens of audio projects. To hear some examples of my work, check out my website, smvoice.info. If you like what you hear, I'd love to be the voice of your next project. Get in touch at smvoice.info.
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. seansoutpost.com.
This week, TechCrunch is running the TechCrunch Disrupt conference. And as has happened many times before in tech conferences, there was a bit of a controversy around sexual harassment and specifically some inappropriate content. Now, I don't really want to get into the argument of what is and isn't inappropriate content, or how inappropriate or how not inappropriate the specific content was. That's not really the point. I think the bigger point, at least to me, is technology has a problem, and technology conferences especially have a problem with attracting people who are not white male heterosexuals. So the problem has a lot to do with how people who are not white male heterosexuals get treated when they do show up at these conferences. One of my pet peeves has been the fact that a lot of tech conferences still, in this day and age, do not have strong anti-harassment policies and don't know how to enforce them. Part of the failure and what happened at TechCrunch Disrupt is really they were not prepared for this. They didn't have any policies in place beforehand. They didn't have any guidance for the people participating. They didn't have any way of fielding and managing complaints. They didn't have any way of solving problems with enforcement. And so as a result, they were completely unprepared. My concern here is that Bitcoin will face a very similar issue. We're massively multiplying the number of conferences. So far, I have not seen anti-harassment policies. Bitcoin is one of those spaces that is very male-dominated. And as a result, I wouldn't be surprised, at least from my experience in the last 15 years in technology and going to hundreds and hundreds of technology conferences, if like in every other technology conference, we're going to face problems with sexism, harassment, possibly even sexual assault, and worse in Bitcoin conference, unless we take some steps now. So that's my pet peeve. And what do you guys think?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, but what kinds of steps would you say could be like concrete steps to end sexual harassment and basically make these kinds of conferences a more welcoming environment for everybody, regardless of gender, race, and orientation, and all kinds of stuff like that?
Well, actually, that's a great question, Stephanie. And unfortunately, the silver lining, if you like, is that because this has been increasingly paid attention to over the last 10 years or so, there have been a lot of very well developed conference policies that have been crowdsourced and publicly available now as public domain documents that people can base their own anti-harassment policies on. And the advantage here is that these policies have now been tested through dozens of conferences like the Python conference, PyCon, the open source conferences organized by OSCon, as well as the various Linux conferences that were among the first to adopt these. That means that these policies have been tested with real problems, with serious problems, including in some cases sexual assault and rape.
It's just a horrible thing to think about. If I go to this conference, am I going to be sexually assaulted or worse? Nobody should have to be asking that question when they're thinking about going to a tech conference.
And yet it's a question that I think a lot of women ask. And conversely, I think a lot of men have the privilege of not having to ask that question or even consider it. When my wife goes to conferences, I insist that she goes armed. Always. And that may be a pet peeve for me, but quite honestly, I find hotels to be very dangerous places. And when you have a lot of professionals getting together and drinking, things happen.
Yeah, sure they do. I knew this topic was going to come up on the show at some point. We haven't talked about it yet, but this is as good a time as any to bring it up. It's been really interesting for me being female and being around the Bitcoin community and just some of the experiences that I've had. Personally, my interests have always sort of tended to spaces that are a little more male dominated, like I'm into liberty and freedom and Bitcoin and atheism or skepticism. And so all of those things are pretty heavily male dominated. But Bitcoin really stands out as sort of the most 95, 98% male. And not that there's anything wrong with that. I mean, like, there are great men that are in Bitcoin. I would like to see maybe a little bit more diversity, but that's what we've got right now. I try to do what I can to tell all my female friends about Bitcoin and to show them how to use it, to help them set up a wallet. So that's just my personal soapbox, to try to bring more people of all different kinds into the community. But going to a Bitcoin conference and walking in and seeing, models at the booths, booth babes, as they're sometimes called, and being a woman, you do kind of get the sense that this isn't really for me. This is for the guys to look at. And hey, I don't mind looking at beautiful women either, but you do just get the sense that this is not a place that's for you. It's a little unwelcoming. When I go on local Bitcoins and I get a message from somebody who doesn't know me, invariably it starts out with, "Hey bro, hey dude, hey man. And 95% of the time, they're right. The 5% where they're not. If you go on the Bitcoin forums, that is not a welcoming place for women. There are a lot of avatars. There are a lot of comments and posts that just make it clear that women are not wanted here. This is not a place for women. There's a little bit of a way to go. And unfortunately, the people who care about issues of diversity, whether it's gender, racial, or other kinds of diversity, those people who are really tuned in and caring about those things, they already get it, right? But there are some people who don't get it, and they're probably like a vocal minority. Unfortunately, they can kind of taint a whole event with this flavor of discrimination or whatever. I do think that most people in the Bitcoin community or the tech community or the liberty community or what have you, like their heart's in the right place. They don't hate women. They don't hate anybody. They're tuned into these things and they want to make it an environment where everybody wants to come. It's just that sometimes there are a few people who are loud and not very welcoming.
Interesting. I think that's really the key issue here, because you're absolutely right, Stephanie. It is a tiny, tiny minority. And what has become evident from the application of anti-harassment policies, especially at places like PyCon and the Linux conferences, was that once a couple of women came forward and talked about sexual harassment, groping, fondling, suggestive stuff, all kinds of things like that, other women started coming out. One of the interesting things was it was the same people. It was the same one or two guys who were responsible for the vast majority of problems again and again. So this was repeat issues with the same people. And that's bad news, obviously, because it shows that some of these situations are repeating. But the good news is that once that was seen and having these policies in place, it was very easy to stop, because it really was just a tiny, tiny minority. What that minority was basically not welcome at the conferences. These issues really decreased dramatically. So it's easy to fix too.
I don't know. I can see a little difficulty there, though, because it's like you don't want to beat an entire community over the head with this, hey, you better be tolerant of women or else there's going to be consequences. Like, most people don't need to hear that message. It's just a few and they're not listening anyway. So what do you do about those few people?
But it's not really about beating the message. It's about the organizers having a clear policy that helps them deal with the issue. Think of it this way. Let's say you're an organizer at one of these conferences, and a woman comes up to you and says, something happened last night with this guy while we were in, one of the conference rooms or something. How do you handle that? If you don't have a policy, you have no guidance, you don't know what to do next, it gets really hairy. If you have a policy, it becomes actually a very helpful means of ensuring that you follow the steps and you treat everyone consistently and fairly and in a way that's predictable and has been brought to the attention beforehand. And that removes a lot of the unfairness. I really think it's all about the policy and what that does for the organizers, more so than dealing with this as applying rules to individuals. This isn't about nannyism or telling you what you should say or not. It's about the conference as a private organization saying, look, these are the acceptable standards of professional behavior in this professional engagement, and we expect people to fulfill those requirements as a private organization.
As the other Caucasian, heterosexual male here, let me play kind of the idiot. I'm very evidence-based, and when we go to these events, I've never seen anything that suggested any of this to me, and I've never heard anyone tell me anything that ever happened at one of these Bitcoin events. So this is something that we're concerned about potentially happening. I mean, the booth babes aside, I totally agree with you. The booth babes, that definitely did happen. But outside of that one particular vendor and that one particular incident, we don't actually know of anything like this happening in the Bitcoin space, right?
To be clear, nothing has happened to my attention that I have heard of. This is not about something happening at a Bitcoin conference and as a result requiring a change. This is about recognizing that when lots of adults get into a place as professionals together, things happen. especially in this kind of environment, based on our experiences, things will happen simply because they have happened in hundreds of conferences again and again. So things will happen. It's just a matter of time. My premise here is that if you have a policy beforehand, when things happen, you can handle them a lot better than if you don't have a policy. It's as simple as it gets.
Okay. And I can see the argument for that. And I don't think I disagree with that. But again, like the thing that comes back to me is, aren't these things that we're finding reprehensible also illegal?
Some of them are, some of them are not. Of course, sexual assault, groping are.
Making an app that lets you stare at breasts is not illegal, right?
Actually, it was showing people's faces while they were staring at breasts. So it wasn't the breast itself, but still, yeah. I mean, making something that objectifies women, for example, I don't think that's illegal. Nor should that be illegal. I don't. Nor should it be illegal. To be clear, we don't think that should be illegal, or at least I don't think anyone here does. But yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you, Adam. Of course, no groping. Of course, no raping. That should go without saying. But why is it still happening?
Okay, so then this is more about just being upfront and clear about what the expectations are, even regardless of what the rules in the real world are. This is setting the rules for these particular conference type of environments where there's lots of okay, so right,
and not just the rules for what is allowable, but also the process for how to address an issue if it occurs, the expectations of what will happen when such an issue occurs. For example, what are the implications of doing something like that? Do you get banned from the conference? At PyCon, yes, you get banned. At LinuxConf, you get banned for life if you pull one of those things. Now, I think that's probably extreme, but whatever. The point is, there is a policy. It's clearly understood by all the participants before they go there. And, you have a choice as to whether you want to go to a conference based on its policies or not.
So the solution here then is just to demand essentially policies from these conferences, which does not cost them anything to put in place. It just is something that they have to actually think about beforehand and then actually communicate to people who are attending, right? I mean, that's the barrier here.
Arguably, it costs them less because it exposes them to less liability than if they don't have a policy. Yes, and that's absolutely the argument. But the argument here is based on something else, which I want to make explicit. These things escalate. If you allow booth babes, you get presentations that are objectifying to women. If you allow those, you get people behaving more and more aggressively towards women, and it keeps escalating. What we've seen is that conferences that are permissive in such ways tend to create an environment that becomes more and more hostile, not just to women, but minorities as well. I think it's important to put these policies in place, not because we want to just make sure that we have a response if something horrific happens, but also to reduce these kind of subtle and repeated offenses, if you like, that create an environment that leads to the more serious ones.
So we're trying to get in front of this, it sounds like, and try to prevent this from happening in the Bitcoin space by encouraging conferences and conference organizers to, in fact, think about this problem before it occurs and to have a policy in place.
I'm going to get way further in front of it by making an explicit pledge that I have made previously for conferences, but I'm now going to make explicit for Bitcoin. I will not attend or speak at conferences that do not have explicit and enforceable anti-harassment policies, because otherwise I would be encouraging exactly the kind of circumstances that lead to a sausage fest of a conference and a hostile environment for non-male heterosexuals.
I think that's really brave of you. Thank you so much for saying that, Andreas.
It's not brave, actually. Honestly, it really is not. It's an easy choice for me to make, Stephanie. It's a it's the easiest choice possible, which is why I think more of the public speakers, and especially the guys in the Bitcoin community who think this is an issue and want to take it seriously, join me in taking this pledge, because for us, it's easy.
I don't think any of the conferences we're going to have policies in place yet.
Oh, yeah, I know. And that's going to become an immediate issue with the Argentinian conference because, I'm still in communication as to whether I'm participating in that. They're going to have to put a policy in place.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see something like that. Again, I hadn't really been thinking about that too much, but I'll take a look at the conferences we're going to and see how disruptive that potentially could be. So, okay, well, again, I have trouble with things that I haven't seen. That's really my issue, is that I really try to be very evidence oriented, and I haven't seen anything like this. But I definitely understand the concern here. No, I appreciate that. And certainly there are there are more opportunities for me not to see it than for me to see it. But that's my only real tie up on this, is that
I totally understand.
Scary.
No, Adam, this is absolutely understandable. Here's the thing. I have seen it. I've seen it at hundreds of conferences, and I've seen it again and again. I've seen it in the atheist community. I've seen it in the Linux community. I've seen it in the open source community, and I've seen it in the security community. Adding up all of those experiences tells me that these are not isolated incidents, that these are not exceptions. These are patterns that develop, and they develop in all circumstances where you have a field that is male dominated, unless the people in that field take active steps to stop it from developing. That's simply the truth. This is not something that happens to bad conferences. This is something that happens to conferences.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to seeing, conferences in this space get out in front of this and hopefully avoid the problem entirely.
I have a question maybe that we can wrap this discussion up with, but it's kind of a big one. How do you think is the best way to encourage more diversity in the Bitcoin space? Or do you think it will just happen naturally? And are you doing anything personally to try to help that happen?
It's a good question. I think that education is really the key. The reason why we have such a male-dominated field in Bitcoin is because in order to appreciate a lot of the core advantages of Bitcoin, you have to have a variety of expertise almost.
What you were getting at was, why is the Bitcoin world mostly white, straight men? That's a really interesting question that I don't think anyone has an answer to. The first thing that comes to mind to me is an intersection of finance, cryptography, or computers. Those are both male-dominated fields. Now, the reasons for why is that because it's a cultural thing and it becomes a boys' club and the women get pushed out? Is it because women aren't interested in those things in as great as numbers as men are interested in those things? Is it because we're kind of groomed from birth to steer women away from STEM fields and so forth?
All of the above?
Yeah, or all of the above, some combination thereof. For me, I want everybody to use Bitcoin, right? And I care about having a large community made up of all different kinds of people. So what I do is just try to tell all of my friends about Bitcoin and help them understand it, help them start using it. And what I find is that women are just as receptive to it as men. If I try to talk to them about Bitcoin, Bitcoin can appeal to everybody. It's so neutral. It's so global. It has the ability to just go into all kinds of spaces. It's not just for certain kinds of people. It's for everybody. So let's make it happen. Tell all your friends about it. And if you want to see more women using Bitcoin, more people of color using Bitcoin, more queer people using Bitcoin, tell your friends that fit those demographics. And I pretty much can guarantee that they're going to be interested in it.
I think you can do a lot more in terms of increasing diversity within Bitcoin. Bitcoin reflects the rest of our culture, unfortunately, in that it represents a technically male-dominated field, but as people in this field, we can take active measures to counteract that. If you recognize the fact that money is for everyone, it's neutral, it's a human right, everyone should have it, and this is for everyone, then you don't have to accept the fact that because the culture is biased, you're going to take that bias and reflect it in Bitcoin. You can work against that. You can actively work against that. You make hiring decisions, for example. So when you're making hiring decisions, in my previous company, one of the most important hiring policies we instituted was stripping names, ages, and addresses off people's resumes. So you had to judge them by their skills during the process. Only at the very end did you find out who the person was. You had to do it blind. And that actually resulted very quickly in an increase in women and minorities in hiring.
That's interesting because there are actual studies that show hiring decisions are affected by the sound of the name and the gender and everything.
Absolutely. It's basically recognizing that bias is not something that bad people do. Bias is something that is intrinsic to the human experience. Ignoring that bias, or worse, feeding that bias, is something bad people do. If you want, you recognize the bias is there. You recognize that even the most enlightened among us tend to make snap judgments based on names, based on age, based on location, state even. If you want to cut those judgments out, you work actively to remove them so that you don't apply your bias. But you can do that in hiring. You can do that in the way you do mentoring and career development within your company. You can look carefully at your Bitcoin startup, your new Bitcoin startup, and ask yourself, are all my women in marketing? Are all my engineering team men? If that's the case, then there's something wrong with your hiring. I don't want to prejudice this and say that I'm going to get 100,000 emails. I'm going to disclaim this up front. I'm talking about how I make my own choices. I'm also suggesting that other people may want to think about their choices. That's all. I'm not saying we should impose any of this on anyone. It's all about private companies and private individuals making choices that promote the ideals that they wish to promote. And that's why I've made the choice to not go to conferences, but that's my private choice. I'm not imposing it on anyone.
You know, there's another point about that too. In a way, discrimination hurts the employer as much as an employee, because if somebody's discriminating based on something arbitrary like gender, race, or whatever, then they might miss out on a great employee and they could just go work for another company that doesn't have that bias. You know, unfortunately, in some spaces, everybody has these biases and people don't realize it, so it can't get addressed. But consider that when you're hiring. You might miss out on a great employee.
As we were getting into this conversation, I was a little bit concerned that we were going to go the direction with it where we should be making sure, where if you're in a Bitcoin or tech related company, you should be making sure to hire a minimum number of these other minority groups. But that's not what you were saying at all, Andreas. What you were saying is that you're just modifying the way that you even go about hiring and how you're looking at skills before you look at the people.
If you remove the organizational, institutional, and subjective biases that you have in your hiring process, diversity happens. Believe me. It may not happen as rapidly as you might like, and you're still going to get some of that cultural bias filtering through, but you're going to be able to shrink that gap. At the end of the day, when we're talking about freedom and we're talking about choices, the freer you are, the more you have the burden of that choice, because your choice now has meaning. So make it carefully.
Thanks for listening to episode 43 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's show is provided by Stephanie Murphy, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, Michael Hill, and Danny Brewster. Music was provided by Jared Rubens and Jazztown. If you can't get enough original thought and discussion, read our daily blog at letstalkbitcoin.com. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at theweeklybitcoin.com. To get in touch, send me mail at adam@letstalkbitcoin.com or visit letstalkbitcoin.com/talk to be directed to our listener subreddit. Have a great day.